London, 1888. The gas lamps flickered in the narrow, damp alleyways of Whitechapel. Cobblestone streets echoed with the distant clatter of hooves and the murmured conversations of those who dared to walk after dark. A thick fog blanketed the East End like a veil, muffling sounds, hiding faces, swallowing secrets whole. Then came the screams. What followed would become one of the darkest chapters in the history of crime. A woman's body was discovered in the early hours of August 31st. Her throat had been slashed with brutal precision. Her body mutilated in ways that suggested more than rage. This was a message. Days later, another woman, then another, each more gruesome than the last. London was gripped by fear. The newspapers exploded with stories, each headline more sensational than the one before. The killer had no name, no face, no trace. But he had a style cold, calculating, surgical. And then came the letter, addressed to the police, written in red ink, signed Jack the Ripper. He taunted them, described his crimes in chilling detail, promised more bloodshed, and true to his word, more women died. Their names became infamous: Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Ede, Mary Jane Kelly, the canonical five. All murdered within weeks, all in the same haunting manner. Detectives were baffled. Witnesses disappeared. Suspects were many, none ever confirmed. The city fell into chaos. And then, silence. The killings stopped as suddenly as they began. Jack vanished into the fog, leaving behind only horror, legend, and a mystery that would haunt generations. Was he a madman? A doctor? A member of the royal family? Or something else entirely, something darker? Over 130 years later, we still don't know who Jack the Ripper was. But the whispers remain. In the alleys, in the archives, in the blood-stained letters signed with that infamous name. Tonight, we journey back to Victorian London to uncover the facts, the theories, and the terrifying legacy of the world's most notorious killer. This is the story of Jack the Ripper. Chapter 1. The First Death. Mary Ann Nichols. It was a cold and quiet night. The date was August 31st, 1888. The time around 3:40 a.m. A carman named Charles Cross trudged through Bucks Row, a narrow, dimly lit street in Whitechapel. The fog clung low to the ground, swirling around his feet. He was on his way to work, as he was every morning. But today, something wasn't right. Lying on the cold pavement, just inside the shadows of a stable yard, was the body of a woman. At first, Charles thought she might be passed out, drunk or ill. But as he moved closer, the horror revealed itself. Her skirts were pulled up to her waist. Her eyes were wide open, staring into nothing. Her throat had been slashed so violently, nearly to the spine. Blood pooled beneath her head, dark and sticky. Her body had been mutilated, her lower abdomen torn open in a savage act that could only be described as monstrous. She was later identified as Mary Ann Nichols, known to her friends as Polly, a woman of the streets, a mother, a person discarded by society, and now the first known victim of a killer, who would soon be called something far more terrifying: Jack the Ripper. The police arrived within minutes. Inspector John Neal was one of the first to examine the scene. He described it as gruesome beyond measure. Yet strangely, there was very little blood around. The killer had skill, precision. He knew where to cut. He knew how to silence her quickly. But even more disturbing, no one had heard a thing. Whitechapel was not a quiet place. Cries, shouts, even violence were not uncommon in these parts. But this was different. Clean, quick, planned. It was as if the killer had melted in and out of the fog, like a phantom. The body was taken to the Whitechapel Workhouse Infirmary. There, Dr. Rees Llewellyn conducted the post-mortem. His report shocked even seasoned officers. 2 deep cuts to the throat, severing both carotid arteries. The abdomen had been laid open by a deep, jagged wound. Several incisions on the lower part of the abdomen had been made in a downward thrusting manner. This was not the work of a drunken thug. It was something else, something clinical. The press erupts. The next morning, the headlines screamed across London streets. Horrible murder in Whitechapel. Woman mutilated in the most shocking manner. Who is the Whitechapel monster? The murder gripped the city. Newspapers printed gruesome sketches. Rumors spread like fire. Was it a lunatic? A butcher? A surgeon? The East End was in panic. Women refused to walk alone. Men eyed one another with suspicion. And still, there were no leads. Polly Nichols' death marked a turning point, not just for London, but for the history of criminal investigation. This was not an isolated event. This was something bigger, something that would return again and again. The Metropolitan Police, under intense public pressure, launched an investigation. Dozens of detectives were assigned to the case. Interviews were conducted, alibis checked, but with no forensic science, no DNA, and no centralized records. The killer might as well have been invisible. Then came the letters. A killer finds his voice. Not long after Polly's death, the Central News Agency received a chilling message, written in red ink, full of taunts and arrogance. It read, "Dear boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I am down on whores, and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. My knife's so nice and sharp. I want to get to work right away if I get a chance. Good luck. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." The name stuck, and so did the fear. Jack had introduced himself to the world. Back to Polly. Polly Nichols was more than just the first victim. She was the signal fire. The warning shot. Her death showed a patterned throat slit, abdomen mutilated, no witnesses, no sound, no trace. The work of someone who enjoyed what they did, someone who planned. She was 43 years old. She had 5 children. She had once lived in a comfortable home. Life had been unkind. Poverty, addiction, homelessness. And yet, even in death, she became part of something bigger than herself. Dark. Legend that would span centuries. The inquest into her murder dragged on, but answers never came. Witnesses offered fragments of the night. A shadowy figure in a hat. A man seen talking to her hours before, but none of it led anywhere. The police were chasing ghosts. And so, the streets of Whitechapel braced themselves. Because deep down, they knew Polly's killer wasn't finished. He was just beginning. Chapter 2, The Killing Spree. Chapman Stride, Eidos Kelly. Polly Nichols' death shook Whitechapel, but the terror had only just begun. What followed was a series of killings so gruesome, so methodical, that they would redefine fear itself in Victorian London. Each victim would fall in the silence of night, each body a message carved in flesh, and each time the killer grew bolder, more brutal, more theatrical. Annie Chapman, the second message. September 8th, 1888. Just over a week since Polly's murder. At 5:30 a.m., the body of Annie Chapman was discovered in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street. She was lying on her back, her throat cut clean through to the vertebrae, just like Polly. But this time, the horror didn't stop there. Her abdomen had been slashed wide open. Intestines were pulled out and laid across her right shoulder. Even worse, her uterus had been removed. Entirely, taken, stolen, as if the killer had harvested it. The mutilation was not wild or impulsive. It was focused, specific. The coroner noted that it could not have been done in the dark without skill. Whoever performed this had anatomical knowledge, the report stated. It was not the act of a frenzied maniac, but someone who knew exactly where to cut. Panic intensified. London was now dealing with a killer who not only murdered but dissected. Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Edos, the double event. September 30th, 1888, known forever as the night of the double event. At 1 a.m., Elizabeth Stride was found dead in Dutfield's yard. Her throat was slashed, but, oddly, that was all. No mutilation, no dissection, just a clean, deadly slice. Some theorized the killer had been interrupted, perhaps scared off, before he could finish. If that was true, he didn't wait long to satisfy his rage elsewhere. Just 45 minutes later, Catherine Edos was discovered in Mitre Square, and what he did to her was beyond anything seen before. Her throat was slashed, her face horribly disfigured, deep, V-shaped, cuts under her eyes and across her cheeks. Her abdomen was ripped open, and parts of her kidney and womb were missing. Taken, just like Annie Chapman. But that wasn't all. Just a few streets away, police found a blood-stained apron belonging to Ed. Nearby, scrawled on a wall in chalk, were the haunting words, "The Jewers are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Was it a clue, a distraction, or something more sinister? Fearing anti-Semitic riots, police ordered the message erased before it could be photographed. And just like that, one of the few physical traces of the killer was lost forever. Mary Jane Kelly, The Final Nightmare. November 9th, 1888. The killing spree reached its climax in the room of a young woman named Mary Jane Kelly, the youngest, and the only victim murdered indoors. She lived in a small, dingy room at 13 Miller's Court. That morning, the landlord sent a rent collector to knock. There was no answer, but through a broken window, the horror inside was revealed. Mary's body was unrecognizable. Her throat had been cut down to the spine, her face, skin peeled from her cheeks. Her heart had been removed, her breasts severed, her organs scattered across the bed and nightstand like trophies. It was as if the killer had taken his time. No fear of interruption. No street patrols. Just him, alone, with her. And the knife. This was no longer murder. This was ritual. Patterns and blood. With each victim, the killer's style evolved. All were women involved in prostitution. All killed at night, in the early hours, often on weekends. Throats slashed first, ensuring silence. Abdomens mutilated, internal organs removed in some cases. The killings grew more gruesome, suggesting increasing confidence or increasing need. Each crime scene was colder than the last, more precise, and yet each left behind nothing, no witnesses, no fingerprints, no footsteps in the fog. The Ripper was everywhere and nowhere all at once. A city on edge. By now, Whitechapel had descended into hysteria. Posters were pasted on every wall. Vigilante groups formed. Men carried clubs. Women traveled in groups. The police received hundreds of letters, some hoaxes, some threats, some claiming to be the killer. One letter, dated October 1888, arrived with half a preserved human kidney. It was signed, "From Hell, the silence after the storm." After Mary Jane Kelly's death, the murders abruptly stopped. Why? Did the Ripper die? Was he arrested under another name? Or had he simply vanished? Theories ran wild. Some believed he was a surgeon, others a butcher. Some whispered he was royalty, protected from justice. There were even those who claimed the murders had never truly stopped, they simply moved. Elsewhere, the truth remains buried beneath layers of fog, blood, and time. But one thing is certain. The name Jack the Ripper was no longer just a signature. It was a shadow cast over an entire city, and a mystery that would never die. Chapter 3: Letters from the Abyss. When the killer spoke. The murders were terrifying, but the words were worse. They arrived unannounced, folded in stained envelopes, sometimes marked in red, sometimes accompanied by pieces of human flesh. They weren't just letters, they were declarations of war, mocking, taunting, daring the world to catch him. The first letter bore no return address, no fingerprints, no mercy. It began simply, "Dear boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet." And just like that, the killer had a voice. The Dear Boss letter, the birth of a name. Dated September 25th, 1888. The letter was received by the Central News Agency 2 days later. It was addressed to no one in particular, just Boss, as if to ridicule those trying to hunt him. In it, the writer scoffed at the police. "I am down on whores, and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled." He described his knife so nice and sharp. He hinted at future murders. But most chillingly, he signed off with 2 words that would echo through history. "Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." Before that letter, no one had used the name. But after that, everyone did. Police were unsure if it was a hoax. Journalists debated whether to publish it. But on October 1st, it appeared in the press, and the name Jack the Ripper was burned into the public consciousness. Whether he wrote it or not, the killer now had a persona, a brand. He wasn't just a murderer. He was a legend. The postcard more than just a joke. A few days later, a follow-up arrived. A blood-red postcard. "I was not codding, dear old boss. You'll hear about Saucy Jack's work tomorrow." The next day, 2 women were found murdered, Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes. It was chillingly accurate. Too accurate. Police began to consider the unthinkable. The killer wasn't just writing to them. He was laughing at them. The From Hell letter, the most terrifying of all. But no letter caused as much horror as the one that arrived on October 16th, 1888. At the doorstep of George Lusk, the head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. It didn't start with "Dear Boss." There was no clever signature. It wasn't written in smooth, practiced handwriting. It simply said, "From Hell, the letter." was full of spelling errors. Unrefined, primitive, but what came with it turned fear into horror. Inside the small box was half of a human kidney, preserved in alcohol. Medical examiners confirmed Catherine Edos had had one kidney removed. Could this be hers? The writer claimed, "I fried and ate the other piece. It was very nice. There was no sign-off, no name, no alias. Only the scent of alcohol, the smudged ink, the dark grin behind every misspelled word." Unlike the Dear Boss letter, this one felt real, raw, personal, sick. Handwriting and psychology, the mind behind the ink. Investigators studied the penmanship obsessively. Experts were brought in to compare the style of each letter. The Dear Boss letter was written in neat cursive, elegant, rhythmic, almost charming. The lines were evenly spaced, the grammar clean. It was theatrical, like a villain in a play. By contrast, the From Hell letter was disjointed. Words slanted upward. Misspellings littered the page. Kidney instead of kidney. Preserved for preserved. It looked like it had been written quickly or by someone who couldn't write well. Some believed this was the real killer, less articulate, more visceral. Others thought it might be a trick, a deliberate attempt to disguise education. What if the killer was fluent, but pretended to be uneducated? It was another layer of the game, taunting the authorities. All the letters had one common purpose: control. The writer controlled the tone, the timing, the terror. While detectives scrambled, he leaned back and watched them fumble. While journalists sensationalized, he fed them more fuel. He called out the police. He told them when he'd strike again. And when he did, it was always just slightly after the warning, as if to say, "You're too slow. I'm already gone." The police were humiliated. Commissioner Charles Warren resigned in frustration. Public confidence collapsed. The city was losing faith not just in the authorities, but in the very idea that justice was possible. Hundreds of letters, most were fakes. Over 600 letters, claiming to be from Jack the Ripper, were received during the investigation. Most were dismissed as cruel hoaxes written by journalists, pranksters, but among them, a few stood out. The tone, the timing, the eerie accuracy. Experts today believe the real Ripper may have written just 3 to 5 letters at most, including Dear Boss, Saucy Jack, and From Hell. If that's true, then the rest were just echoes, imitations of a monster. But the damage was done. The killer had created a voice that others couldn't resist mimicking. He had turned his crimes into theater, and the world couldn't look away. A killer's silence. After November 1888, the letters stopped, just like the murders. There were no more postcards, no more kidneys, no more taunts. The voice of Jack the Ripper fell silent. Was it because he was dead, or because he was finished? We'll never know. But the letters remain sealed in glass cases, tucked in museum vaults, their ink still soaked with mystery. They are not just messages. They are confessions. They are monuments to a terror that words alone should never be able to hold. Chapter 4: The Faces Behind the Fog. Who was Jack the Ripper? He was never caught, never named, never punished. But that didn't stop the world from asking, who was Jack the Ripper? Over the years, countless suspects emerged. Some were drunks, others were doctors. A few were even famous, but for names stood above the rest, for lives twisted by rumor, obsession, and shadow. Let's meet them. 1. Walter Sickert, the painter of darkness. He was a celebrated British artist, a student of James Whistler, a friend of Edgar Degas, and some say a killer. Walter Sickert painted eerie, melancholic scenes of empty rooms and distorted women. One painting, titled Jack the Ripper's Bedroom, showed a dimly lit chamber, inspired by a rumor that the killer had once lived there. But it wasn't until Patricia Cornwell, a best-selling crime novelist, entered the story that Sickert became a prime suspect. Cornwell poured millions into investigating him. She claimed his paintings mirrored the crime scenes, that he had a twisted fascination with mutilated bodies, and most damningly she said DNA on some Ripper letters could match him. Her theory: Sickert was impotent from a botched childhood surgery. He hated women because of it, and he turned that hatred into art and murder. Critics dismissed it as fiction. Historians called it but the darkness in Sickert's work still lingers. Every canvas feels like a scream trapped in oil. 2. Montague John Druitt, the fallen gentleman. A barrister. A quiet man from a respectable family. So why did he drown himself in the Thames weeks after the last Ripper murder? Montague John Druitt was never arrested. He was barely even investigated. But in a private memo, a senior police officer wrote, "There is strong reason to believe he was the murderer." Druitt's death in December 1888, soon after Mary Jane Kelly's brutal killing, raised eyebrows. Was it suicide out of guilt? A way to escape discovery? He had no alibi for the nights of the murders. He had suffered mental health issues, and there were whispers, unconfirmed, that he had a sexual insanity. But there was no proof, just timing, tragedy, and silence. If he was the killer, then he took the truth with him to the bottom of the river. 3. Aaron Kosminski, the Mad Barber. An immigrant from Poland, a Jew, a schizophrenic. Aaron Kosminski lived in Whitechapel. He hated women. He heard voices. He wielded razors. And for decades, his name haunted the Ripper files. Scotland Yard officers believed he was the killer, but they never had enough evidence to convict him. He was eventually institutionalized after threatening his own sister with a knife. In 2014, a supposed breakthrough shook the Ripper world. A shawl allegedly found at the murder site of Catherine Eder was tested for DNA. Researchers claimed it matched descendants of both the victim and Kosminski. The case seemed closed. But then came the backlash. Critics said the chain of custody for the shawl was dubious, that contamination was possible, that the testing methods were flawed. Was it science or wishful thinking? Today, many still believe Kosminski fits the profile: mentally ill, misogynistic, living near the killings. But others see only a convenient scapegoat. A poor immigrant, easy to blame, hard to prove. 4. The Royal Conspiracy, a killer in the palace. No mystery is complete without a royal scandal. Enter Prince Albert Victor, grandson of Queen Victoria, next in line to the throne. The theory: he had a secret affair with a working-class woman. She gave birth to a child. To protect the monarchy, powerful figures silenced the witnesses one by one. The Ripper murders weren't random. They were assassinations. The story gained traction thanks to Stephen Knight's book, Jack the Ripper, The Final Solution. He claimed Sir William Gull, the Queen's physician, carried out the killings on royal orders. Even Freemasons were pulled into the tale accused of orchestrating. a deadly cover-up. It was juicy, cinematic, the stuff of legends, but historically, it falls apart. Albert had alibis for some of the murders. There's no proof the women were connected, and no evidence of a royal bastard child. Still, the theory refuses to die. Because sometimes, people want a bigger villain, a system to blame, a conspiracy grand enough to match the horror, truth, or smoke. More than 130 years have passed. Hundreds of books, dozens of documentaries, DNA tests, psychological profiles. Still, no definitive answer. Maybe Jack the Ripper wasn't just one person. Maybe he never wrote a letter. Maybe he never had a name. What if the real mystery isn't who he was, but how we've kept him alive for so long? In every suspect, we find a reflection of fear, of obsession, of the darkness we hope doesn't live inside us. But maybe that's why we keep looking. Because if we name him, maybe we can kill the myth, the real reason. In the end, it wasn't just one reason. It was a perfect storm. No forensic science, a fragmented police force, a media wildfire, a panicked, prejudiced public, and maybe powerful hands steering the truth into the shadows. Sometimes, it's not what we see that blinds us, but what we refuse to see. And that's why Jack the Ripper was never caught. Not because he was a ghost, but because the world around him chose fear over clarity. Chapter 6. The Legacy of Jack the Ripper, Modern Theories and Popular Culture. The fog that once shrouded Jack the Ripper has never fully lifted. For over a century, the world has grappled with the mystery, trying to decipher who the man behind the knife was. But no matter how many theories are proposed or how much DNA is tested, the truth remains as elusive as the killer himself. As the years pass, Jack the Ripper's legacy continues to evolve. His name still chills the blood. His story still haunts our imaginations. But what are the modern theories? And how has this gruesome chapter of history permeated our culture? Let's dive in. 1. Modern DNA analysis, a new era of investigation. For over 100 years, the question lingered: could modern science finally bring the Ripper to justice? In the past few decades, a handful of breakthroughs have emerged, most notably DNA analysis. In 2014, a study involving a shawl purportedly found at the murder site of Catherine Eddowes sent shockwaves through the Ripper community. The shawl was tested for mitochondrial DNA, and the results appeared to match the bloodlines of both Eddowes and a suspect, Aaron Kosminski. Kosminski, a Polish immigrant and barber with a history of mental illness, had long been considered a prime suspect. Though there was never enough evidence to charge him, the DNA testing sparked hope among Ripperologists that they were on the verge of solving the case. However, this revelation came with a storm of controversy. Critics of the study pointed out potential flaws in the handling of the shawl and the DNA testing methods. Some argued that the shawl's authenticity was in doubt, as it had passed through many hands over the years. Others claimed that contamination was possible, given the lack of a clear chain of custody. Despite these criticisms, the DNA evidence reignited interest in the case. Could Kosminski be the Ripper after all? Or had modern technology opened the door to more questions than answers? The debate continues. But one thing is certain: DNA analysis has changed the way we view old cases, and it has opened up the possibility that Jack the Ripper's identity might someday be uncovered. 2. Cultural impact. Jack the Ripper as a pop culture icon. The legacy of Jack the Ripper goes beyond the streets of Whitechapel. His name has been woven into the fabric of popular culture, inspiring countless books, films, documentaries, and theories. The Ripper's gruesome killings, combined with his mysterious nature, make him a figure of dark fascination. He represents the ultimate villain, someone who evades capture, someone who leaves the police and the public grasping at shadows. The first notable fictionalization of Jack the Ripper appeared in 1888, only weeks after the murders began. The media, hungry for sensationalism, started creating stories around the killer, and this spread to theater and literature. But it was the 1901 play The Mystery of the Ripper that cemented the killer's place in fiction. Since then, the character of Jack the Ripper has appeared in hundreds of films, TV shows, and books. One of the most famous depictions came in Johnny Depp's 2001 film From Hell, based on Alan Moore's graphic novel. This film portrayed a fictionalized account of the murders, exploring the possibility of a royal conspiracy. It wasn't just a tale of murder. It was a story of social intrigue, class conflict, and political corruption, blurring the lines between fact and fiction. Jack the Ripper also made his way into literary works. From Sherlock Holmes stories to contemporary crime novels, authors like Stephen King and Patricia Cornwell have incorporated Ripper-esque themes into their own writing, creating stories that continue to fuel the public's obsession with the case. Perhaps one of the most iconic and chilling portrayals came in the video game Assassin's Creed Syndicate, which featured a playable mission in which players tracked down the Ripper. The game's dark atmosphere and period-accurate details gave players a chance to step into the world of Victorian London and face off against the notorious killer. Jack the Ripper's legacy in popular culture is undeniable, but with each new retelling, each new adaptation, we are reminded that we may never truly know who he was. 3. Theories and speculations. Who was Jack the Ripper? For every decade, new theories emerge. From academic investigations to conspiracy theories, people have been desperately trying to fit the pieces together. As modern forensics and psychological profiling evolve, some continue to look for the killer's identity in new ways. Beyond Kosminski, there are still many suspects who haven't been ruled out. Walter Sickert, the famous artist, has had his name tied to the killings. He allegedly had a dark fascination with the crimes, and some of his artwork appears to have eerie parallels to the crime scenes. Montague John Druitt, a barrister with a troubled past, has been a suspect in Ripper circles due to his sudden death, just weeks after the final murder. The royal conspiracy theory, which claims that the killings were ordered by members of the royal family to cover up an illegitimate royal child, has persisted in popular imagination, particularly in books like Jack the Ripper, The Final Solution by Stephen Knight. While each of these theories is compelling in its own right, none offer irrefutable proof. Some believe that the true identity of Jack the Ripper is hidden not in the crime scene, but in the minds of the detectives and the public themselves. Perhaps the mystery is less about finding the killer and more about the way we construct our own myths and legends. In recent years, there's been a shift toward psychological and profiling theories. For example, some believe the Ripper was a man who had undergone severe trauma, perhaps related to his mother or a traumatic event in his childhood. His hatred for women, seen in the brutality of the killings, points to a deep-seated psychosis. 4. The enduring mystery. Why do we care? The mystery of Jack the Ripper is not just a historical case, it is a cultural phenomenon. Why does the world still care about a case that has remained unsolved for over a century? Perhaps it's because Jack the Ripper represents the ultimate human fear, the idea that we can never fully understand the darkness that lurks within our society and ourselves. His identity remains His terror is timeless. The murders were not just violent acts. They were a challenge to our understanding of evil. And as long as we continue to search for answers, we are, in a sense, searching for a truth that may never exist. Jack the Ripper lives on as a symbol of our collective curiosity and fear. He is the unsolvable riddle, the monster in the dark, the story that refuses to end. And maybe, just maybe, that's why we still can't let him go. End of chapter 6. The killer's name may remain elusive, but his legacy is etched into the very fabric of our culture. And as long as his story lives on, the mystery of Jack the Ripper will continue to haunt us. Jack the Ripper, the ghost that never dies. Over 130 years have passed, but the shadow of Jack the Ripper still lingers in the foggy streets of London. The truth, like the killer himself, has remained hidden in the darkness, slipping through the cracks of history. Who was he? Why did he do it? Will we ever know? The answer may never come. The mysteries surrounding the Ripper have become part of the very fabric of our nightmares, woven into our collective fears and curiosities. No matter how much time passes, the chilling question lingers: could the truth still be out there? The case may be closed, but the legacy of Jack the Ripper continues to fascinate and haunt the world. His story lives on in the books, movies, and even in the dark corners of the internet. The Ripper is no longer just a murderer. He's a symbol of the unknown, the embodiment of our obsession with evil, and the mystery of human nature itself. But as we continue to speculate and search for answers, one thing is clear: the legend of Jack the Ripper will never be solved, because some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. If you've been captivated by this tale of terror, you're not alone. Countless people have tried to crack the Ripper's case, and still, the killer remains a specter in our minds. If you want to hear more stories of unsolved mysteries, true crime, and other chilling tales, make sure to hit the subscribe button and join us on our journey into the unknown. Like, comment, and share if you've enjoyed this dive into one of the most chilling stories of all time. Don't forget to click the bell so you never miss an episode. Do you think you know who Jack the Ripper really was? Or is his identity just another mystery that will never be solved? Leave your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation alive, because even if the truth never comes to light, the search for answers will continue. Thanks for watching, and until next time, remember, the past is never truly gone. It's only waiting to be uncovered.